Hello everybody, welcome to the conference on community-based service learning in Borneo. I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak to you today and to thank you all for taking the time to attend. My name is Roger Harris and I'm a visiting professor at Unimas, University, Malaysia, Sarawak, where I previously worked as a lecturer. My presentation, which only has 6 slides, should last around 20 minutes. After which I understand there will be time for some Q&A. So I can't really tell this story properly without telling my own story, which I'll keep very brief. The most profound piece of learning that stayed with me from school was concerned with global inequality. Why was it, I asked more than half a century ago, that many of us live in comfort while so many others struggle for existence? Even now, hundreds of millions of people are living in extreme poverty, while huge rewards go to those at the very top. There are more billionaires than ever before, and their fortunes have grown to record levels. Meanwhile, the world's poorest get even poorer. Almost half of humanity lives on less than $5.50 a day. The world's 22 richest men have more wealth than all the women in Africa. So questions such as this stayed with me as a young man building a career until my curiosity and sense of adventure finally came over me, and I took off from my native England to travel for 3 years through Africa and Asia. Having been exposed to such a kaleidoscope of geographies, climates and cultures, settling back in the UK was not an option. So I spent the rest of my life, more than 40 years now, living and working as an expatriate in Africa, Asia and the Middle East. Ultimately, I was able to segue my profession towards a closer engagement with the topic of global inequality. Having been a systems analyst by training, I've been working for corporations and government bodies, designing and implementing computer systems. So with the help of a PhD and a job as an academic, I switched my professional focus towards introducing information technology to underserved and marginalized communities in less developed countries. At the time, the late 1990s, computers and the internet were becoming pervasive, but significant disparities existed in terms of who could access them. This was known as the digital divide, being the gap between those who had access to technology, mostly urban residents in developed economies, and those that didn't, mostly the rural poor in less developed nations. There was a risk that these folks would miss out badly from the benefits of the information society unless specific actions were taken. So around about the same time, the United Nations, the World Bank, and various other international bodies and governments were getting excited about the potential for the internet to deliver development benefits to poor people by closing the digital divide. Better access to abundant information was regarded as an essential component of poverty reduction efforts. The concept became known as Information and Communication Technologies for Development, or ICT for D. This caught my attention when I realized that much that I had learned and practiced about deploying computers in corporations and public bodies could be applied to rural communities without much adjustment. I was greatly inspired by a project in India by the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, an influential organization working to accelerate the use of modern science for sustainable agricultural and rural development. They focus specifically on tribal and rural communities with a pro-poor, pro-woman and pro-nature approach. When I heard about their projects in rural India, I knew instantly what I wanted to be involved in, which is how I wound up switching to an academic career and working in Sarawak, Malaysia on the island of Borneo. I was able to secure funds from the same organization that had funded Swaminathan, which allowed me to visit their village sites, pictured here. We also partnered with projects in other countries, Mongolia for one, which is where I took the picture on the right of a nomadic family that ended up on the cover of a book to which I contributed a chapter. In fact, that picture testifies to the lengths that people will go to in order to get connected to global telecommunications. At the time, this was mostly through the establishment of what became called telecentres, which are community centres with a few computers connected to the internet that provide shared community access to information and communications. They are manned by individuals who facilitate use of the technology towards development outcomes that their communities appreciate, often to do with agriculture, enterprise development, education, and health. This is how I came to Barrio in Sarawak in East Malaysia on the island of Borneo, with the intention of setting up a telecentre and helping the community use it to implement development initiatives of their choosing. Barrio is isolated in the forested interior, and the only practical means of getting there was by small aircraft. Initially, although it was very exciting, it was also very uncertain. Nobody there used computers, mobile phones hadn't been invented, and the internet was unheard of. Nevertheless, community leaders were very receptive to the idea, and after overcoming a host of logistical challenges, my team was able to set up all the technology we needed, including satellite communication and a solar power supply in the absence of grid electricity. With considerable assistance from colleagues and invaluable support from key community members, many desirable outcomes emerged, involving a wide range of benefits that are well documented elsewhere. But briefly, they include revenues from increased tourism, more productive agriculture, improvements in health and education, and just as significantly, recording and preserving of their fast diminishing culture. The project won multiple awards and through several replications in other similar communities, went on to influence government policy for the provision of internet access to rural communities. Later, we established Malaysia's first local community radio station, the Community Broadcasting to Itself, which led directly to liberalisation of Malaysia's community broadcasting policy. All along, the team paid close attention to how the community responded to our ideas, ensuring that we worked together toward interventions that were welcomed and which supported their notions of development. This was a major learning experience because it became very evident that what the government considered as development did not always coincide with what the community thought of it. In fact, this happens to be true for indigenous communities worldwide, but more of that later. Once the project was firmly established, I returned with my family to my home in Hong Kong and began a 12-year career as a consultant with the major global aid agencies and several governments, setting up similar initiatives in 15 countries across Asia. Often this involved work with underserved and marginalized ethnic minorities in rural localities. All the time, I revisited Barrier regularly to support the work there. Over time, it became apparent that the Barrio community were appropriating the technology that we had introduced and using it for purposes that we had never imagined. Firstly, it became an important tool for recording and preserving their culture. The people of Barrio belong to the Kelabit ethnic group, one of Malaysia's smallest, but with a specific and vibrant culture that they are anxious to retain. Second, community members use their connectivity to promote other initiatives for sustaining their livelihoods and social networks. Principal among these is a slow food festival held annually, during which households prepare and sell their food preparations derived from locally grown or gathered ingredients. The festival spreads over several days and attracts around 1,000 visitors, doubling the population. It also includes cultural activities and performances, and is now a mainstay of Sarawak's regular tourism calendar. Organisers explained that without the internet, it would never have grown so dramatically. Seeing these developments, we came to realise that the people of Barrio, and indeed the rest of the Highlands, have something to teach the rest of us about local community development and how technology can be used in its support. So we hatched the idea of the eBarrio Knowledge Fair, which began in 2007 and is held every other year since. It has since expanded to other communities and has grown into the Borneo Knowledge Fair. It's held in a village in the highlands, and it consists of a series of workshops where the residents describe their lifestyles and the problems that they face in maintaining them. Attendees include researchers, officials, development professionals, and NGO representatives. They receive an immersive experience in Indigenous life, and together we propose opportunities for deploying technology beneficially and for topics for further research that will generate knowledge to be put to good use as the residents see it. It's definitely not your normal academic conference, but it has grown over the years, so we wrote a book about it, which is available online. Overall, the Knowledge Fair is a rare and valuable learning opportunity to help outsiders understand the perspectives of the Indigenous people, their views on development and the environment, and the relationship between both and technology. I first met Amy Kwo Somchanmavong and Shauna Ulrid of Cornell University at a conference in Malaysia, to which I was invited in 2014, that was themed around service learning for universities and ICT for D. Amy and Shauna described their service learning experiences working with rural communities in Asia, while I outlined my experiences introducing ICTs to remote rural communities. We clicked immediately. Having learned so much from my own experiences, I was already convinced that others could do the same, especially young people on the cusp of their professional careers. The encounter with Amy and Shauna resulted eventually with the first cohort of Cornell and Unimas students arriving in the remote and isolated Sarawak community of Long Lamai in January 2016, accompanied by them and myself. I repeated the experience with a subsequent group in 2020. This program, according to Cornell's website, fosters cross-cultural learning while building skills in community-based research, building on ICTs for rural and Indigenous sustainable development. It actually does a lot more than that. The feedback that I've received from the participating students suggests that it engenders a life-changing outlook on the world that they will carry forward as tomorrow's leaders into whatever occupations they adopt. This harmonizes with my own experiences, which I now acknowledge as a rather protracted service learning adventure to the extent that it has now become something of a lifestyle. One of the most significant learning outcomes from all our engagement with these communities in Borneo is that Indigenous, local and traditional knowledge systems and practices, including Indigenous peoples' holistic views of community and environment, are a major resource for adapting to climate change. But these have not been used consistently in existing adaptation efforts in Malaysia and Borneo. The same is true for numerous Indigenous communities around the world, those that reside in the areas that are most susceptible to climate change, like the rainforests, the Arctic, low-lying islands and coastal areas, and mountain glacial regions. There is a growing realization that Indigenous peoples have been the stewards of these regions for countless generations and are the best equipped to maintain the biodiversity that they hold. Their traditional knowledge of the environment also has much to offer to modern science in understanding both the impacts of climate change as well as the means of adapting to them. As the world begins to appreciate the imperative for sustainable development embodied in the Sustainable Development Goals, we would all do well to reflect on these lessons. My years as an inadvertent service learner in Borneo have taught me much that orthodox development often damages Indigenous societies by destroying their lifestyles, stripping their environment, denigrating their cultures, and coercing them to assimilate into the dominant society. I also understand now what we can learn from underserved and marginalized people about the value of community, of working together and supporting each other towards common goals, but also respect for the environment, which is elevated to a near spiritual dimension amongst the people that I have worked with. Many of our partner communities operate specific practices for nurturing the local environment, such as fisheries and forests, so that they can continue to provide precious natural resources indefinitely. Such appreciation will be vital if we are to have any hope of saving our only planet from the ravages of rampant exploitation and consumerism. I therefore commend without reservation the service learning experience that the Cornell Unimas program offers to anyone with similar concerns. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm also contactable at the links on the screen. Thank you.